yeah, in terms of getting the work done, whatever it is, no, just in terms of making valid work, that's the important thing. I think I want integrity and to be. I'd rather be recognised for that than for being successful or whatever.
Welcome to the Flowing Fruit Bowl, a platform dedicated to the exploration and discussion of art and the creative process. I'm your host, Aaron S., and in today's episode, I had the chance to talk to the incredible artist, Duncan McAfee. Based in the UK, Duncan is a mixed media artist whose work focuses on questioning the limits of figurative art, creating images that blend a range of styles such as cartoons, abstract realism, and pop art. His work has a very postmodern feel, underlined by the somewhat religious references he uses to title his work. He currently has a solo show at the 303 Gallery in Lowestoft, which runs into the end of April. The first place to start is this place I start with every single person is just tell us a bit about yourself and how you became an artist.
Okay, so yeah, my name's Duncan McAfee. I grew up in, just outside Welwyn Garden City, just north of London, one of those kind of new town places. But kind of in the countryside, and yeah, went to the local primary school and was just I was always interested in art basically. That's kind of what I've always done. I always drew, I always did things. One of my earliest memories is making weird little, I think I had like a scrapbook where I'd go through magazines and cut out, and it was a little bit weird because I was quite young and my mother was kind of helping me a little bit. I think I was cutting out women out of magazines, like the Sunday magazine that comes with the paper, and then just cutting their clothes out and then just sticking the flesh bits down into a book. And so it was like, I don't know, I must have been 7 or 8 or something, I don't know. But that's one of my early art experiences. It's good, my mum was kind of right there backing me up. And but yeah, no, I had an early in primary school as well. I had like a friend called James Proctor. If you're listening, James, big up to you. But we used to we had this big, I think it was like an A3 sized book thing, and we'd take it in turns to take it home. And one of us would, draw a dinosaur, and then we'd draw. You remember Zoids? I don't know, maybe you're too young for Zoids, but yeah, okay, Zoids. So we used to, everyone had Zoids at that point. But yeah, so one of us would then draw over the outline of the dinosaur with all the armor and stuff and draw the guns onto it. And it was my first collaborative project. But it was brilliant, yeah. And then we ended up with this kind of thick book of 30 or 40 drawings of dinosaurs all made up of guns and, carefully rendered and colored in and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. And I remember getting some prize at primary school for drawing an amaryllis that somebody brought in once. I don't know. Yeah, so art. And then heading towards secondary school, I surprised everybody because I wasn't particularly academic. I surprised everybody by passing the exam to get into school in Horsham, or just outside Horsham, called Christ's Hospital, which is a very strange boarding school where they all wear these kind of weird penguin kind of uniforms, like a black ankle-length coat and yellow stockings up to the knees, breeches with gold buttons just at the knee level, and a little white kind of tie thing that comes out over your coat. It's crazy, and I can't believe I went to this place. Was very lucky to get there on an assisted place, and I think I got into the school I went to, it was like a sort of residential weekend. You had to go to do the exam. You stayed overnight and had like a series of papers that you filled out. But part of it was having a meeting with one of the teachers. And I took in my kind of what I considered to be my portfolio at the time, which included these Zoids and my amaryllis drawing. And this guy was like, "Can I keep it and give it back to you tomorrow?" And took it to the head of the art department. And I assume that was kind of why I got in, because I can't really imagine that I did like glowingly on all the exams or anything. I'm pretty sure that the head of art there kind of took a bit of a liking to me. And he kind of really nurtured me through secondary school, to be honest. I was called Mr. O'Connor. And he was quite a big big man in the lot, you know, in every kind of respect. His presence was large, his physicality was large, and he was also like one of the chief examiners for the South of England or something. So like every year, everybody would get all A's, and yeah, but it was great. And it was when I went on to do foundation after school, I found that it was almost like a bit of a step backwards, because it was so well resourced, and all the teachers in the art department were called artists in residence, and they were there, you know, on kind of a small salary, but they got given a house, and then they had a studio in the art department they could use. So it's this real kind of buzzing environment filled with, like, you know, jobbing artists. So it just, yeah, I just really took to it, and yeah, kind of bummed my way through secondary school, flunked most subjects, but somehow managed to stay on, and ended up leaving with an E in design technology and an A for art. And that was, yeah, kind of, many parents might have suggested that I wasted an opportunity there. But yeah, so I don't know, yeah, it was really good. Then I went on to Hatfield, which is near where I lived, to do a foundation course, and took a couple of years out after that. Sorry, yeah, the foundation course was quite interesting as well, actually, because it was University of Hertfordshire, and it was the first year they'd just moved into an ex-British aerospace building, like that had been gutted. And our first week as foundation students was to go in and build the partitions in the space so that they could run it as an art studio. I thought, because it was just like an open plan office basically, with everything ripped out of it. So yeah, we spent a week like putting up stud walls, and that was our induction onto the foundation course. All this stuff wouldn't happen these days.
No, that would not happen whatsoever.
No, but for me it was brilliant. It's like great.
That's like a skill as well, though.
Yeah, learning a bit of skills. We're taking ownership of the space. It really felt like our thing then. It was like, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, and then really great tutors on there. I kind of quickly realised that I was definitely a fine artist. Did a bit of design and a bit of whatever. As you do on a foundation, you do the kind of carousel bit first, and then just really kind of latched on to the life studio. So I spent, you know, the rest of the year doing life drawing and painting. I was taught by a guy, I can't remember his name, Roger something, but he was taught by either by Uglow or another student of William Coldstream. So he was kind of taught what he called the dot and tickle approach to drawing. You know, this kind of, you kind of show your workings basically, for these kind of little nicks and notches where you're kind of measuring stuff with your eye. So I had quite a kind of technical training in drawing, and that kind of bled into the painting as well. Yeah, and then applied for, actually no, I decided to take I didn't even apply at that point. I took a year out because, yeah, I thought the idea of going on to art school with nothing to talk about but my experience of being in school and art education wouldn't necessarily be that interesting for either me or other people, you know. So it felt like I needed some experience of life. So I took a year out, and I did a year as a voluntary, what was then called a care worker, but now you probably say something like personal assistant, to this guy John Kelly, who's still a good friend actually. But that was through the community service volunteers. So I went, you know, had an interview with them, and they said, "What do you want? What do you want?" You know, I was offering the idea is that they offer people a place to live and like living expenses in return for you doing voluntary work 5 days a week. So it's kind of like a sort of like a job, but kind of a weird voluntary arrangement thing.
Yeah, kind of a job, but not quite a job.
Not quite a job. But I went in because I was doing these kind of, I guess, kind of Lucian Freud, Eric Fischl, Francis Bacon kind of inspired figurative paintings that were kind of, yeah, representing the psyche and the flesh, all quite maybe slightly uncomfortable things nowadays, but quite traditional in some respects. But anyway, I kind of went to the CSB interview and said, what I want to do is I would like to be placed in a mental institution because so that
Oh, wow.
will help to influence my painting. I mean, this is me as a 17, 18-year-old, because that will give me like source material for my painting. And they just went, no. We've got this guy John who's really kind of active. He's like a physically disabled guy, or physically impaired guy, but he drove a van. He worked for a charity called Tffb. He was a part-time youth worker. He was a musician, but he's now does like acting and all kinds of stuff. So a really active guy who just needed a bit of kind of help, doing stuff like moving things around. He's got little arms and legs. So, but that was great. So I went and did that for a year, which was much more useful and much better. But yeah, and then so some of the things we did was like he ran inclusive residential holidays for kind of disabled and non-disabled kids and teenagers. And we went away to the New Forest and did like a cool week there, and they were doing all kind of usual stuff, I guess, like what's it called, like abseiling and that kind of thing, but all kind of kitted out so that everyone could do it, even if they're a wheelchair user, etc. But as part of that, he was like, why don't you run a little workshop? And so I did like a little art workshop with a small group, and that kind of got me thinking about how I might kind of what I might do for money in later life. So I did that for a year, and then having done that, I moved back home, and my grandmother was starting to kind of lose her marbles a bit. So I ended up moving in with her for a year and just kind of helping out cooking. My mum sort of said, "Oh, you've done a bit of care work, so why don't you go and live with your granny?" But in return, I had a spare room at her house, which I used as a studio to kind of build my portfolio to apply for a degree. So that worked quite well. Did a bit of pot washing, cooked my nan's meals, and painted. Did that for a year, and then applied to a bunch of colleges. Got into Chelsea, and went there for 3 years. And so as a painter, got onto the painting degree. Spent 2 weeks painting, and then just abandoned painting and didn't paint again until about 7 years ago. I'm now 45. But and it was just kind of that period, I think, which is the sort of end of the 90s. Painting was considered, I guess, unfashionable. A lot of the kind of educational stuff happening in universities and art schools was, there was the time when they were starting to kind of break down the specialist courses and put everyone in together. Just before that, actually, when I graduated, I think the first one was Brighton, maybe. I remember doing a visiting teaching day down there. But yeah, the idea was, the painting was kind of dead. And if it was done, it was kind of too hard, too complicated to do. There was too much. It's too kind of weighed down by its own rhetoric. So you can't look at a painting without the whole weight of the history of painting kind of bearing down on that, and you can't see a painting anymore. It's all, tied up with all the complexity of that. So, I spent 3 years kind of experimenting and doing all kinds of other stuff, bits of performance, process-based writing work, and I made bits of sculpture, and I started using sound a bit. So my degree show, had all of those things in it, and I started collaborating with another student in my year called Andrew Miller, and we made a book called 101 Art Jokes, which was part of our degree show, and that was our first collaborative project. And I might just carry on telling my whole life story.
Honestly, it's absolutely fascinating.
Okay. So we graduated together in 2000, and then continued working. And actually at that point, we both essentially, Andrew and I, abandoned our individual practices so that we would work exclusively together. And we did that for almost 10 years. So in the meantime, I trained as a teacher. So I did a part-time PGCE postgraduate certificate in education at the Institute for Education in Russell Square, and then I was teaching part-time first in a secondary school, and then I got a 3-day-a-week job in a sixth form college in Hackney, which had just opened, and I was kind of pretty much newly qualified and was kind of running this art department. Kind of got it up on its feet, I think, really. It was me and one other teacher who left before. Anyway, this bit's boring. Yeah, but anyway, I worked in education. I worked in a sixth form college for a while, and then I went freelance after 3 or 4 years, and did sort of publicly funded projects, and including going back to the sixth form college that I taught at as a teacher, but then going back as an artist. And then suddenly everyone kind of went, yeah, let's, I remember doing projects when I was a teacher where you'd say, can everyone bring something in tomorrow, and we're going to make, either draw an object from home or something, and like 2 people would bring something in. so you'd bring loads of stuff yourself. So then when I went back as an artist, I came in with all these objects. I said, can everyone bring in something from home that we don't mind destroying, because we're going to put a speaker in it, and we're going to then make like a talking sculpture with this found object. And it was like one person didn't bring something. People came in with like phones and like old teddies, and it was like amazing. Just the response from having like a real person come in rather than your teacher just going on at you made a massive difference. So that's good. But yeah, as I was saying, in the meantime, I was working collaboratively with Andrew Miller, and we kind of worked under the banner of the Miller and McAfee Press. We did a number of publications, but we kind of had the idea of it being called a press. I think Andrew said something along the lines of that it's more like the German word Verlag, which means press, but it also has a wider implication as something like a site for the arranging and disseminating of information, which sounded much more grand. But I think, we kind of had, I think we were sort of vaguely political. It was very conceptual kind of work. And we did quite a lot of stuff with sound and, a number of, we made like a collection of choral records, which were all collected from charity shops and jumble sales and things like that, and then we turned it into a kind of archive, like a museum style archive, which was all catalogued and stuff. We did some lovely kind of public, we did a nice public audio piece for the Forbury Gardens in Reading, which was very nice. But yeah, and then we found that as we went on, the better. Our work was very conceptual, and the more time we spent talking about work, the better we got at arguing ourselves out of making stuff. So it got to the point towards the end of that 10 years where we just kind of said, should we take a break? And we kind of split off, and both of us started making completely different work, almost like going back to what we knew a bit. I don't know, I was still making a lot of sound stuff at that stage, but yeah, we both started working a lot more intuitively, and I've lost my trail a bit, but what have I done my entire life history yet? I haven't. No, I've only got up to like, okay, so yeah, we did that. So we took a break. Yeah, I went back in the studio. I started making a lot of collages. So I had made a lot of collages in my teens. So the first project that I did was I took a book of collages that I had made it when I was like 17 at my grandmother's house. That's a good, nice little callback to what I was talking about earlier. And then I made partner pieces for each collage. So I had a collage made in 2017. I can't remember the exact date, but something like, I think it was 17 years between it or something. Yeah, I can't remember. But yeah, there were pairs of work, but like a conversation across time. And then I got into kind of cutting up all my old photographs, and I made these weird collages, which were literally my, family photographs that I destroyed and then turned into these strange sort of totem pole things with bits out of magazines, and sort of rearranging my own personal history and mythologizing it, playing around with the idea of memory as a creative act and stuff like that. And then slowly I started to kind of make collages which had little bits of paint, the odd brush mark in it. And it was like I was kind of refusing to admit that I wanted to go back to painting. But slowly paint sort of crept in. And then eventually, in about, I think, 2016, 17, I kind of decided to go back to paint and admit that I was a painter again. And suddenly found that rather than it being this kind of really problematic, torturous, heavy activity, it could be a really fun, playful activity. And yeah, it could be a fun, playful activity, and all those kind of reference points that used to be like either you had to really justify every kind of reference to another painting or potential kind of callback to the history of art. Before that was difficult and problematic and had to be really carefully thought out. And now I just thought, fuck it, it doesn't matter. I can just play it like a game. It's so I kind of that's what's evolved to where I am at the moment, is that I kind of think of painting like playing a game of consequences with myself. So all of that got me to that.
Oh, like you've done a lot of different things, which is why I really want to speak to you.
Yeah.
I think you have, a lot of insight to offer. And I think going back a slight bit, because there's a lot to unpack from just that alone. There's a lot to unpack. So I think what I really want to get at first is education and the idea of art education. And, as you said, you changed to become a teacher. Like, why is art education so important to you? And what kind of made you kind of go down the path of becoming a teacher? Because it's not something that everybody necessarily wants to do.
So art education is important to me. I don't know if art education as such is important to me. I mean, I think it's important to the world, but for me, it was more just about doing art. I like, making things, making images. I think that's what's important to me and what I have to do. Of my way of mediating the world and staying sane. I'm already getting a bit twitchy, after a week off. The holidays are fine, but I kind of want to be back in the studio. That's my natural habitat. And the second part of the question was what? Why is education? Or why did I become a teacher? Yeah. So that was. I think that was on a really kind of quite a pragmatic kind of level, where. So within the environment of the art school at that stage, there was still. I was at the tail end of when most of the people who taught me had just kind of walked off their degree and had a mate who ran a foundation or ran a course somewhere and kind of just walked into a job as either a visiting tutor or a kind of have a permanent position somewhere. And they were just trying to kind of pick that apart and telling everyone that they needed to go and do a course and get kind of proper like recognized affiliated kind of qualification in order to be able to teach. So in my mind, I was thinking, if I do this and get a bit of teaching experience under my belt, then I can go and work on a foundation course. I'll be better qualified. My CV will be better to go and be like a visiting tutor on a foundation course, which is what I imagined that I would end up doing. Would be part-time in the studio, part-time on a foundation course. But it didn't really happen. What happened? I ended up in this sixth form college, and it was kind of hard work. And I think, then the realization as well that education was just getting worse. It's got progressively worse. It's like funding has been stripped out. Consecutive education secretaries have made the curriculum like tighter and more prescriptive and sidelined art further and further. Well, there was talk, even when I was working in this, I taught in a private secondary I did a maternity cover, so I taught 2 terms. It was my first job, and there was talk then that this was St Dunstan's and Catford in South East London. And they were talking about potentially moving on to sort of the international baccalaureate model, like moving away from from A levels to do this baccalaureate model, where you kind of choose a range of subjects, and but you end up with one qualification at the end of it. Art was a bit kind of secondary in that. Like, it was hard to kind of be to specialise in art, I think, from what I understood. But one thing I really liked about it was there's a section in it where you have to complete an essay which sets out your developing philosophy about the world and your place in it. And it's unassessed, but you have to complete it, otherwise you can't get the qualification.
That's interesting.
That's kind so that's kind of where there's those kind of things where it's
that's a
more
challenge.
Holistic. Well, yeah, but I think it's important. Like, you leave school with you don't have to think about anything. You don't have to consider who you are and what you mean and what the world means. And, do you know what I mean? You're not really told to, or like encouraged even to think about that. You're almost the opposite. You're encouraged to just kind of be a machine that kind of gets these qualifications under your belt and goes out and gets a job and blah blah blah. I don't know. So I thought, but education was going completely the other way, where what I saw as good practice, which I was trying to kind of bring down from degree level stuff that I'd experienced. So having kind of teachers who were practitioners, which why isn't that in every subject? Why aren't all physics teachers like part-time teachers who are then doing cool developmental experiments the rest of the week, and then they're bringing that into the classroom and all the enthusiasm that comes with that.
Yeah.
Why isn't that the case in every subject? Yeah, which is kind of where my part-time PGCE was at the institute. They were very progressive like that, and they were kind of it felt like that could be a model that could be expanded, and that all teaching could be done by professional practitioners, and a teacher-learner model of doing things would be the way forward. But the complete opposite was happening, and everything was getting tight and tight. So you end up with just career teachers who are over-stressed and blah blah blah. We know the story, and they usually they last between 3 and 5 years. So I did 3 years, and then that's it. So and then practically, I suppose I was able to leave because at that particular point, I think I got a residency and a couple of commissions, and then my wife was very supportive. That's the other thing that's always been quite a constant, and kind of encouraged me to quit my job and try and get by doing it with doing that with a less regular income, basically. So I went self-employed at that point, and kind of scraped by for kind of 10 years until the coalition government came in, and then funding sort of dried up. And at that point, actually, my wife's work was taking off. She was back at work. She was a civil servant, government economist. She left, and her brother set up a restaurant company called Hawksmoor. It's like a steak place, quite a fancy one. And that was just sort of taking off. So she went to help them out a little bit, which turned into like, from a morning a week, turned into like a day, 2, 3. And then before you knew it, she was kind of full-time director of whatever. And so she was the breadwinner, and I ended up being the kind of stay-at-home dad for a good chunk. So that's there's a question later we were asking about routine. So that was kind of now once both kids were in primary school, it was like I can go to the studio from kind of like 9 till 3 pretty much, and it's like a sort of slightly half it's like I can do it as a job. So I would do that, and then I'd do all the pickups, bring the kids home, cook and clean, etc.
Because that's one thing that I'm very conscious of. A lot of artists I speak to are parents, and it's like, how do you find that balance between family life and creation? Because your art takes a long time, but you also have a family to look after.
I mean, it's taken a back seat at various points. I mean, there's I don't know. There was points where I'm like, well, I had a really good year. I did this residency with Whitechapel Gallery. Had like a bunch of projects on the go. It felt like there was real momentum, and then it's like, oh, we just moved house, and you know, I don't really want to pay builders to come and do it up, so I'm just going to take 6 months off at this really inconvenient point and gut this house and build everything myself because I have those skills, and that's been great. Like that's how we kind of got to where we are now, doing that a couple of times. But yeah, it's kind of interrupted the flow of the career, I guess.
But isn't that nice though, in a way? Because I think from the outside, we forget that artists are people too. And that life doesn't always go how you plan it's going to go. And not everybody has the perfect career where they can come home and they just paint full time. Like life gets in the way, but sometimes in a good way.
But maybe, I don't know, maybe some people, I think you have to be, I've just never been that much of an arsehole. That's the problem. Like, people have to be like totally selfish and like tell everyone else to go away, whatever, I'm going to do my thing. I don't know. I've never been that kind of. I've never been that ambitious, and I've always kind of, wanted a bit more balance. I think. I don't know. I don't know. Now it feels. I'm really kind of. It's only in the last year or something that I've kind of really gone right. It's time to do something with this. Like it's stupid. I've been making stuff for so many years. I've got drawers and drawers of stuff.
Wow.
And like paintings is packed, But I was quite happy just as long as kind of a couple of people come, a few friends, as long as my kids go, oh, that's really cool. Then I'm like, yay, that's good. And then I can move on and do the next thing. And that's part of it, I guess, as well. It's like the work, the work kind of takes you to the next piece of work in a way. So that's all that kind of matters, really. I mean, I don't know, I don't think I'm kidding myself. People say this, don't they? I'm like, everyone, you'd love to be like a famous artist, and showing in all the big museums and be like recognized and have accolade poured upon you and blah blah blah. I just don't know. I don't know if I do. Even now, like I've done a couple of shows this year, and it's like that's just time out of the studio. I've got to finish stuff properly and like get it framed and transport it and like I don't know, write stuff to give to people, and that's not the fun bit's making work, and like that's the reason I do it. And I just want to make as much work as possible and keep it moving and see where it goes and like follow the trail.
See, that is true, exciting. But the kind of the job of an artist isn't just creating art. And I think that's kind of a big misconception around artists. It's not just the constant creation of work.
Well, if it's a job, is it a job? I don't know.
For some people, yeah.
I mean, I'm just talking about what I like doing. So in many respects.
So I'm kind of curious.
Kind of doing. Go on, sorry.
No, sorry, no, continue.
I was just going to say, like, ultimately, I think I just did all that stuff, like doing the houses, whatever, doing the teaching, saving my body, just setting up a situation where I don't have to worry about it financially. I just organize a situation where I've got time to make work, because that's what I enjoy doing. So maybe on one level, I guess that is like totally selfish, and maybe I am more selfish, but that was my ambition, just to have as much time as possible to make work, not just really to be out there particularly or get the recognition.
Yeah, but that's kind of clever though, because I think recognition and accolades and awards doesn't mean that you're not a good artist. I think there has to come a point in every artist's kind of, I guess, journey where they have to sit down and kind of ask themselves what kind of artist they want to be, because not everyone's going to be Damien Hirst. Not everyone's going to be, a millionaire making work that, they don't technically even make. That's not going to be everybody's job, really. So it's kind of, you have to have a discussion with yourself, I guess, without sounding weird, of like what you kind of want as an artist, and what you're willing to sacrifice and what you're willing to gain, because essentially you're just creating work with no clue if anyone's even going to want to see it or care about it. So it's like you have to make sure you're doing it for yourself first and foremost. So
you're right. I think I think the work, yeah, it's getting the work to the point where it's good enough. So, do you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't really have wanted to push my work out there so much, like so many years ago, just because I think that's kind of what's happened. I've hit a point where I'm like, this feels kind of good. I think this work's quite interesting, and it's getting more positive feedback. And yeah, obviously, yeah, I have sold a few things recently, and it is like a nice feeling when someone wants your work and they're prepared to pay money, and they kind of, want to live with it. So I think it's only a very recent thing that I've kind of started thinking maybe it's time to take stuff out of the drawers and get it out there. But I think in terms of getting the work done, whatever it is, in terms of like making valid work, that's the important thing. I think I want integrity, and I'd rather be recognised for that than for like being successful or whatever. And then and then there are people who are really, really good at networking and that side of it, self-promotion, etc. And that's not something that I've been particularly good at in the past. I'm trying to do it more now. But yeah, there's people who kind of, you see the work and then you think, really? And then you meet them and you go, oh, I see. You're like really good at talking, and I don't know. So I'd rather be recognised for the work than for my ability to self-promote, I guess.
It's weird for me because it always seems to me that the best artists are the artists that don't self-promote or who aren't as good at self-promoting. I feel like they come from a place of good intentions as opposed to it being, all about them and what they can do. And I have a very interesting insight because I talk to a lot of artists. I'm engaging with a lot of artists on a daily basis. And it's just very interesting how people are very, very different, but people have very similar goals. And it's like people choose different kind of methods to get there. That's just a really interesting observation. And I like the fact you said it's about integrity. I like that. I think that's it's kind of very noble of you, I guess, in a way. Because it's like, you're not doing it, because you're not doing it for like, oh, I can just create this and it will sell and people will love it and it's cool. You're like, actually, I want the work to be valid in your own eyes before anybody else even sees it. And it's crazy that you've got, sorry, and I was saying, it's crazy. You've probably got so much work. And, other artists in your position would have created content from that work and would have had, social media sites running back, 10 years or whatever. And they would have like, quote unquote, used that for success. But you've left it in a drawer, which is probably, I imagine, largely insane. And that says a lot about you, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I probably did stick some of it on social media, but I don't know how good I was at it. But,
what is the biggest challenge of being an artist?
Yeah, probably the money. That was what I was thinking of, actually. Because, if I wanted to be rich, then I would. There are so many better ways to make money. Like, why would you want to be an artist? That's not a good, it's not a good hit rate. Do you know what I mean? We'd be better off, I don't know, anything. Just take out a loan and do property. That's like, there's loads of money in property. Do property. If you want to make money, do something like that, or become a day trader or something. So yeah, I think that's the challenge is probably how you make a living out of it. And yeah, my philosophy has always been to not to kind of engineer a situation where you don't have to make money, and then you can make work without any compromise. And then I'm at that tipping point now where I'm sort of going, right, I'm going to do this full time and try and sort of push it out there a bit more and take a bit of a risk. And it would be nice to sell some work. But I got to this point without kind of having to compromise the work, because I've been making money elsewhere with teaching or whatever. See living with my wife.
That's a really good philosophy, though, because you don't put pressure on yourself to have to create work.
Right. Yeah, that's. But then I do have to create work, because if I stop a bit, then I go a bit wonky. So it is. I don't know. It's not therapeutic as such, but it's like just something that I need to keep doing. Otherwise, what do people do otherwise? They either just work all the time and are really depressed, or drink. I don't know.
Watch Netflix. That's what
Yeah.
people do.
Right. Yeah. See, that would just destroy me. So I need to. I have that thing where, like, I need to get to the end of the day and then have something to show. You know, even
Oh,
if whether it's
yeah.
a bit of woodwork, but something physical to show, anything. And then art is like the best of those. I can get by if I've like put a shelf up or something, but I need to have created something from scratch that has a life of its own, ideally.
So that's really cool. Actually, something you said earlier was really interesting because you referenced Lucian Freud and Francis Bacon in your earlier works, and you said about kind of the psyche, and kind of a question from that arises like, do you think that art should be uncomfortable?
Should art be uncomfortable? It's a weird one because I get a lot of comments, particularly from my recent paintings. It's like people go, "Oh yeah, they're really cool, but I don't know if I'd want it in my house." I don't think I could live with it. And it's weird because I really like them, and I find the explain. I like it is. They're literally. I've just taken stuff that I think looks nice, that I like looking at, and kind of jammed it together. So I like a bit of abstract expressionism. I love cartoons. I like whatever, like bright colours, and I don't know. I've just kind of done it, like bits of this, bits of that, bit of pop art in there, and just kind of jam it all together and just make something that I think looks really cool that I would like. What I do. There's my studio. I have like banks of paintings up on the wall to kind of refer to, but because I like being surrounded with them. So I don't know. That's what did you say? Should it be uncomfortable? Yeah, I mean, I think if something's too comfortable, it's a bit kind of insipid, isn't it? There's no kind of joy or outrage. A little bit of outrage can be quite invigorating, can't it? So I don't know. Should it be uncomfortable? And I don't think it necessarily has to be. Things can be beautiful. Matisse is not uncomfortable, but it's it's not. It's still beauty. It's still good work. It's still art. It doesn't have to be uncomfortable. But yeah, I like if it's a bit kind of slightly on edge, maybe. Yeah, probably.
So actually, let's get into your work.
Okay.
Because that would probably be a clever idea at some point.
All right.
So can you describe your work for those who may not have seen it?
Right. So, well, most recently, I mean, my work has been very. I had a website up until a few months ago when I changed it, which was it was just a block of square tiles, each one relating to a project, and I hadn't differentiated. They were just in chronological order, and I didn't differentiate between education projects, participatory stuff, collaborative stuff, and then any work that I'd made on my own, which maybe was sculpture, sound, collage, painting, drawing. And it was like a kind of mad department store, which didn't make any sense to anyone. Because none of the work, I mean, you could probably, if you spent enough time, you could probably draw out a few like common threads which went across most of the work, maybe to do with kind of time and like some sort of relationship with yourself over time. This idea of a kind of fragmented self over time, I don't know. And I don't know. There's a few things, but mainly just confusing. So historically my work has been all over the place, including being in bands and doing music stuff, until very recently when I kind of made a really conscious effort to kind of trim away a lot of stuff. So I've stopped doing music altogether. I've pretty much stopped collaborating, and I've concentrated on painting and drawing. And I think I've kind of found a way of doing painting that kind of includes enough different things. So it's kind of, so that I don't get kind of bored from my kind of slightly kind of frenetic butterfly attention span. Can be satisfied on any given day by doing something different. But at the end of it, I end up with a body of work which is at least all in one medium and sort of hangs together because it has kind of common elements that run across it. So if I was to describe the paintings, they're kind of bright, cartoony, explosive, messy paintings of kind of figurative, abstract stuff. Often heads, sometimes full characters, yeah. And they kind of combine like kind of flat graphic stuff and cartoon motifs with abstract, expressive paintwork and yeah, bright colours and stuff. Like, does that sound reasonably accurate?
Yeah, it does sound very accurate. It's actually very well described rather than saying I put stuff together.
Yeah. But it kind of came. So I think I've always been kind of interested. That's why I kind of collaborated a lot. So I've collaborated with, you know, people who are not necessarily artists, poets, or whatever, various people. And I'm always interested in. I did a residency at the National Institute for Medical Research, and that was really fascinating. Talking to scientists, you expect like the kind of science and art opposition, which is sort of traditionally portrayed. But actually, you're talking to these kind of they're quite experimental. And there was a guy called Lyle Zimmerman who was a genetic scientist who spent a lot of his days basically firing radiation at zebrafish just to see what would happen, seeing if he could mutate their genes in kind of interesting ways. And then in his spare time, he was a jazz saxophonist.
Oh.
And so, talking to him about the kind of his approach to science and the how you kind of how scientists work. He was kind of very kind of blue. That's the kind of blue skies research technique, rather than the kind of what's called translational, where you're kind of you're doing experiments towards finding a cure for a specific kind of cancer or something. So everything's geared towards that. Often that's due to like how you get your funding. But this was kind of like a bit more idealistic and old school approach, where it's just kind of like we just do stuff and see what happens, and then great discoveries like the Human Genome Project come out of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so where did your interest in figurative work come from?
Yeah. Oh, so the kind of defining moment for me, I think, was an A-level trip up to London, and it was at a time. Yeah, so what was this? It would have been 95, 6, something like that. 1995, 6. Yeah, and then I remember going up with the group, and there was maybe 2 or 3 galleries on Cork Street that had coordinated, so they were showing quite a lot of Francis Bacon's portraits, the small with the black backgrounds, and just seeing those for the first time, just kind of everything kind of clicked and popped in my head. And then you walk in and you'd see like a little photograph of Muriel Belcher and a little bit of history, and then you go that's definitely Muriel Belcher, and that one's somebody. You could tell exactly who was who. So I was amazed at how you could, or how Bacon had this ability to make somebody kind of recognizable through these kind of seemingly chance actions. Yeah, I don't know. The paintings just blew me away. The kind of this idea he had of like capturing somebody as they, capturing the absence of someone almost as they kind of left. I think almost like the residue of a person. There's so much about Bacon. Yeah, so that just basically totally turned me on to painting, and that was my kind of watershed moment, I think. Which I've never really got over. I'm still vaguely obsessed with Bacon.
Oh no, Bacon's work it's really incredible, because actually it's transcended very well through the years. Like even today, you see his inspiration in a lot of artists' work, and that's there's only happens with a few artists. People like Edward Hopper, for instance. Where their work is still relevant now as it was back in the day, and it probably even more so now because it's more widely disseminated. So I think it's just the power of it's really the power of art and the power of good art. So yeah, I would agree. I think I'm a huge fan of Bacon's work. I think it's really interesting because there's just so many different kind of ties and threads you can find within the work. I think that's really what it is. It's because it's so loose, both physically and literally that you can almost tie any kind of experience to it.
It's the vulnerability of the characters. I think it just feels very honest. It feels very real. But I know, a number of other. Obviously, like contemporary, like George Condo is a massive influence as well.
Course.
Of a bit of a hero, and I like that. That kind of lineage. I guess you've got like Picasso, Bacon, Condo, and then me. So, that's what's happening here.
So that's really interesting for me because it actually makes me think of at least a good. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing to say, but a good 5 different kind of artists that I'm going to send to you because you might like their work because it's all very kind of figurative, but not quite figurative, kind of distorted, not quite distorted, kind of. I'm going to say vibe. That's a hideous word. Kind of aesthetic. And I'm going to definitely send them to you because I think you'd be really interested in their work. At the same time, I also don't want to feel despair because it might be similar to what you're doing. Because I'm always conscious that.
Because I'm aware that I'm not doing anything.
I know.
There's loads of. There's like everyone's out there, like everything.
That's something we'll talk about in a second. But the thing is that I'm the kind of guy who sends everybody a bunch of different inspiration just randomly. One day I'll just send you like 10 different artists and with no description or no kind of forewarning as to why I'm sending it to you. I just see something and I think of you and I'll send it to you. But then I'm also very aware that that might not be a good thing because people might either get offended by it or they look at it thinking, I don't know, like I'm trying to show them somebody else is copying them or somebody else is doing something similar. I don't know. It's something that
don't worry about that.
But yes, there's quite a few people I can think of just on the top of my head that I'm going to definitely send you that you might be interested in. They might already be on your radar. They might not. I'm going to remember to do that later on. Okay, so my next question for you is kind of like, why do you think that we're drawn to looking at images of other people? And what do you think that reveals about ourselves as a society?
Narcissism, and that we're narcissists. No, I don't know. I think I just read there's a book, I forget the author now, it's called The Case Against Reality. And he's kind of mixing together a kind of really interesting blend of psychology, evolutionary biology, and like visual theory, to kind of basically explain how the world that we experience doesn't exist. It's obviously we traditionally, I suppose people think that we somehow kind of reconstruct what's here in our head, and so we have this kind of 3D model of stuff that is actually there, and it's quite close to the truth. And then the more that we've evolved, the closer we've got to seeing what's actually there. Whereas this book argues that it's actually the opposite. And that actually, the more we've evolved, the further away we've got. So, because as an evolutionary, from an evolutionary biology perspective, what we've evolved to see are like symbols, which I can't remember the word he uses now, but essentially it's like recognizing things that will be beneficial to us in order to survive long enough to procreate, in really simple terms. So if you actually saw what was really there, it would be too much information. That would kind of, people who did see what was actually there would most likely perish because they'd be unable to kind of function. Yeah, exactly. So essentially it's saying like the more advanced you become, the further away from reality. And we've got no idea. It could all just be this kind of, we are basically living in a sort of simulation of our own construction.
That's
so why are we go on?
No, continue.
I was asking, why are we drawn to faces? So I guess within that perspective, there is definitely a thing, isn't it? Like, what's it called?
Pareidolia.
Yeah. So where that's to do with recognizing faces.
Yeah, it's like looking for faces within things that haven't got faces in.
Yeah, but that's like deeply human. You look at your speaker and it's like a big mouth. You personify everything. So like, I think it's just unavoidable. It's just part of our kind of inherited, evolved psychology or whatever the apparatus that we have.
So style is something that I think is kind of like the bane of a lot of artists in terms of like having to feel like they need a style or they have a style or they need to be original. Like, would you say you have a style?
So yeah, I'm a big fan of Daniel Richter, the
Yes.
German painter. So there was something he said in a recent interview, which was along the lines of that style was once a method that's turned into a bad habit. So I like that. I don't see the point of style. In a way, I guess you could say I've sort of settled a bit on this with the Exploding Heads, that there is a kind of stylistic repetition in there. But I feel like it's gonna change and move on. Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of anti-style. I'm more like, maybe, oh no, you're still there. Sorry, you went really still and quiet. I thought we cut out there. So I'm more interested in kind of like I think there's always a sort of a bit of irony involved with what I'm doing. And when I was doing lots of drawing, it was always kind of slightly kind of ironic, really exact sort of A-level style pencil drawings, and then painted elements that looked like pieces of paper collaged on, but they were actually painted. So now it's like, yeah, I'm like sort of self-consciously using an abstract expressionist style for like a bit of this painting, and then I'll kind of do a like graphic, cartoony kind of graffiti style for something else. And it's like I'm not really doing a style of my own. I'm just kind of like quoting, and I guess it's a sort of postmodern thing, isn't it? But yeah, it's very self-conscious kind of thing going on there. So I don't know. Yeah, that's just what you asking about style kind of triggers in me.
No, that's perfect. And do you think, well, not do you think, like, but is originality important to you and the idea of like being original?
I don't. If I feel like I always want to feel that I'm doing something new, at least to me. So whether that's original, I don't know. But it's definitely kind of. I mean, it was without showing. Just going back to what we said earlier about showing stuff. So without showing anything, it's like I never really needed to finish anything. You sort of get to a point and go, I've learned what I needed to know from this, so I don't need to finish it now. I can just move on to the next thing. That's already kind of set up some new questions for me to deal with in the next thing.
That's a very interesting perspective, as opposed to just being like,
right.
yes. And actually, it kind of makes me consider like the idea of, and this is something for later, but I'm also asked a bit now in terms of like the idea of spectatorship in your work, in terms of like, has the fact that people are now viewing your work changed the way you create it?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. I think, yeah. So my relationship with social media, basically Instagram, was I kind of started it grudgingly, and then I kind of left it for a bit, and then only in the last year I've kind of been much more trying to do it as a sort of routine, like sitting down at lunchtime, making a post, thinking about it, and I guess the difference it's made to me is it's quite useful to sort of treat it as a little mini deadline. So I at least have to have done something every day. I can't just go in and like look at things and then go, I don't really feel like it, and just do the crossword or something. I have to have actually kind of done something, which is good. And then the other thing that I find quite useful, so I don't know how much of this is to do with whether people see it or not, but more that for me, like every day I try and write, almost like people call it micro blogging, I think. But yeah, I try and sort of write something about what I'm doing or what I'm thinking about in the studio that day. It doesn't always happen every day, but I try to. And actually, most of the time that's really useful. So I'll kind of be like, oh, fine, I've got to make a post. I just want to like have lunch or carry on or whatever. But yeah, and then just the act of writing a paragraph, it's like, oh, okay, that's what I've been thinking about. And it's like, yeah, it materializes when you kind of write it down. So again, it's sort of like a little personal mini deadline. But I don't know. the fact that it's public, maybe I would find it harder to stick to if it was just me doing it in my sketchbook or something. The fact that it is out there is like, yeah, at least there's some audience. I don't know. There's some kind of somebody to let down. So I feel like I should be doing it. You know.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. It's like a reinforcement of your ideas because it's like you could just. I think sometimes, although saying that, sometimes social media can be feeling like you're, screaming into the void, I guess, a lot of the time, because you don't know if people are going to respond. And if the type of people you want to respond will see the work, then there's a whole kind of algorithmic, challenge. But I think it's kind of holding yourself accountable, really, more than anything.
Well, I've had some really, on the whole, yeah, obviously, I mean, Instagram's incredibly frustrating, and you have days where you're like, just what's happened? Like, no one's like, I don't know, suddenly I'm down to like 20 likes for the last 3 days. What's going on? And then it'll send you a little note saying, hey, paid to go pro, whatever it is. And then you get your post seen by more people, and you're like, hang on a second, that is the algorithm. It's like it's been programmed to market to you. So it'll like,
yeah,
I'm pretty sure it does this. It'll like kind of reduce the amount of people that see your post videos, and then it'll say you can pay if you want more people to see your stuff. It can be really frustrating, but on the whole, I've had really positive experience of it.
So getting into your work a little bit further in terms of the actual series of work, one kind of unifying theme I've kind of realized in your work is kind of the idea of religious imagery.
Okay.
And I'm very, very kind of really curious about like kind of where that stems from.
Well, okay, so yeah, so this secondary school that I went to was a Church of England school. I mean, yeah, I grew up. I remember going to Sunday school and stuff as a little kid, but I'm not from a religious family. It was all very kind of half-hearted, and I'm definitely not a believer. But yeah, and then I think that if anything, it was going to the church school which probably tipped the balance, because yeah, it was. We'd have like they had a lot of, it was one of those amazing school with big historic buildings and an amazing massive chapel thing. And we'd have a Sunday service every week, but then we'd have to get up on Tuesday morning. You have to get up an hour early, and then before breakfast go and do chapel practice, the whole school, like running through the hymns and stuff before breakfast. So you're hungry, you're tired. I mean, that's how cults operate, isn't it? They do that. They wake you up in the middle of the night and they fuck with your head.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, so I was just like, what the hell is this? How is this even legal? I don't know. But yeah, so the whole thing's vaguely ridiculous. But it does mean that I've got these kind of, yeah, I guess I've got these kind of stories, like kind of half remembered. I was sort of not really paying attention, but it was there. It was like it's a big part of my culture. Growing up, there's this kind of all the Christian stories and the kind of general background, and I love the fact that the Church of England is there's a lot of talk about holy doubt, and then it's the idea that do we believe in God? Well, it's good to kind of not be that sure, and that's the fundamental basis of the Tffb kind of philosophy or whatever. So I love its kind of weird contradictions, and I like the fact that they are kind of, even if you're not religious, that you have like elements of these stories which are sort of so ingrained in culture that they're kind of there, a bit like and they could be, and I like to think I use them in almost just as that, as like kind of triggers or ways in, and they could be as valid as a kind of motif from an advert, or a bit lifted from a historical painting or a modern painting or whatever. Again, all sounds very postmodern, I guess, that kind of flattening out of the value of things so that everything just kind of has equal status.
So I'm kind of curious though, like, do you ever worry that people might take it the wrong way? Say like maybe people who are, strongly religious, maybe they may see it as, not necessarily blasphemous, but maybe see it as, kind of shock value, or kind of like, oh, you're doing it just to provoke.
Yeah, and I don't. Yeah, I mean, I was because I was looking at. I've been looking quite a lot at Rembrandt and his late religious portraits, and they're incredible. And I think I don't know, maybe there's something about him and the way that he approached the subjects. I mean, he dressed up as the prophet Paul and did like portraits of himself, this kind of weird rag wrapped around his head and that slightly kind of quizzical, supercilious kind of expression. I don't know, is he taking the piss or is he? I don't know. But I think, yeah, what I think about it is that it's honest. It's like humanizing and getting inside them. Maybe I don't want to. Am I overstating it there? But it's in the same way that Rembrandt did. But I think that it's like humanizing these characters and turning them into like I don't know, confused, lustful, messed up people. They kind of are all over the place. And then, yeah, in terms of reverence to kind of historical stuff, I was also looking at the kind of Hindu iconography and like they're in and around the Kama Sutra, and just sort of setting that off against kind of staid Western traditions with Christian imagery, and there's like I've read through the Kama Sutra or translation of it recently, and there's loads of really progressive. There's some like not so progressive stuff. It's quite patriarchal in a lot of ways, like people having lots of wives and stuff. But there's loads and loads of stuff about like giving pleasure to women and women, like the openness about sex and sexual pleasure, and it's not like it's very different to what we grew up with. I think our kind of understanding of these things, and and also the kind of the graphicness of the imagery, like really kind of like lots of nudity and penetration, and these are kind of what's the word, like holy objects or whatever, sacred objects, people having sex. So I guess it's asking questions about that. Why is that the case? And why is how things kind of like compare with each other? I don't know. That's the whole thing, isn't it, with like religion and kind of compare religions across time with each other and kind of go, oh right, and try and at the center of all this there might be some truth, but surely the fact that they're all so different and kind of tells you something. If they have like a mildly analytical or inquisitive mind. Yeah. So I don't know. Am I trying to cause offense? No, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I think I'm definitely trying to like poke at things and kind of open them up a bit. Yeah.
So is it important for your work to kind of provoke discussion and kind of be like, make people question what they're saying and kind of, just generate discussion with one another, not even necessarily with you?
Yeah, I guess so. I think these days my work is much less about ideas and much more direct and intuitive. So I've made a real conscious effort in a way to sort of try and think less and do more. So that's something I found recently with like making I did those big ink drawings, the Paul series. I think you mentioned them in a question that you might ask later. But and there was this kind of thing of, I was just thinking in terms loosely of kind of Rembrandt's kind of building up of glazes and stuff, and kind of approaching the image in quite a kind of technical way of like how I built it up with like layers and layers of diluted ink, and then bits would get darker and other bits would be left, and you'd have kind of, I was thinking about it in terms of kind of time being layered up. So me having a conversation with myself over a number of days, and like either reinforcing particular marks or trying to obscure other ones with new marks, and kind of you could see the decision-making process kind of as it went back, as it became lighter. So I was just thinking about all that stuff. And then when I stepped back, I saw this kind of, think, oh, it's finished now. And then you see this kind of sort of head that looks like it's kind of glancing from side to side, maybe it's kind of anxious or excited, and it's sort of emerging from this undefined sort of darkness. And I was like, oh right, yeah, it's kind of, that's what's happening now. This was kind of over towards the end of the summer, or whatever, maybe over the summer holidays. But as we were kind of emerging from our second lockdown, and it was, yeah, this is it. It sort of seems to be depicting this kind of shared sensation of the anxiety and excitement about coming out of an extended lockdown. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that in any way until I saw the finished thing. So it kind of talks back to me. The work talks to me rather than me trying to get the work to start a conversation with someone else. Yeah, I think that made sense.
No, yeah, that is. That's really interesting though, because I think a lot of times artists have the intention of their work going in, and they have like a very defined kind of idea or philosophy or kind of subject matter they want to paint or create or just explore, and then they kind of set that as their final goal. And then when they step back, they're like, I call this image of this, say, landscape is going to ask, this question, and they put it out into the world. But it's nice that as the person who creates the work, is also kind of a revelation to yourself when you look at your own work. That's very interesting because, art is all about the person creating it. In any aspect, no matter what you create, it's about you because you're the one creating it.
Yeah.
So I think that's very, very interesting how you had that conversation with yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I want to see what happens. Really, it's kind of, so like my process is kind of, I'll go in. One day I might go in and just feel like, oh, I do have some kind of strict intentions. I want to put an eye here and make it really precise. And then, but another day I'll go in and just go, I'm not happy with this image, so I'll just kind of throw something at it, or I'll paint like the wrong color. So make an intentionally really bad decision and try and like ruin the image, so that I've got something to rescue, like I can work against it. So it's this game. It is a process, and it's a conversation. I mean, I mean, in terms of ideas, like that was, I kind of talk about self-collaboration and this idea of, I was really into the Beckett play, Krapp's Last Tape. Do you know this one?
No.
So it's Samuel Beckett. It's a one-person play, a one-man play, and it's the premise is it's an aged man. I think the implication is that it's his last birthday, and every year on his birthday he's made a tape recording of himself, and he's spending this birthday like going over old recordings and listening back to them, and he's kind of like pressing play, listening, stopping, arguing with younger versions of himself. Sometimes the tape voice will mock the older man and will be like, hey, there you are, I know what you're going to be doing, listening, and it's this really kind of interesting dynamic with like different versions of yourself. And I think that's how I imagine the paintings. So they happen over, like, part of the reason I work in series, I think, is so that it allows more time to happen between elements. If I have 40 exploding heads going, then by the time I've done something to each of those 40 paintings, maybe like a week will have passed, and I'll go back to the first one and I'll be a different person. I mean, that's true between before lunch and after lunch, but it's sort of more exaggerated over a longer period of time. So I like this kind of strange kind of form of self-collaboration. I think I used the word schizo painting a couple of times. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but
that's funny you should say that, because when I read that I was a bit like, I'm not too sure if 21st century, if that's going to really wash. But hey,
I might go back and change that.
How about say, hey, it's your biography you're writing. It's up to you.
Yeah.
But that's actually a really nice segue into the fact I actually want to talk about your series. So I wrote down here some of the last. So you've done a lot actually over the last year or two. You've done quite a lot.
Quite a busy year.
So the series of works they've got. So 2019 is Exploding Heads. 2020 is The Last Supper. 2021 is Oh God. 2021 again is Big Pools, and another 2021 is Self Portraits. How has the
Yeah.
last 3 or so years been for you in terms of your output?
That's been quite good. So yeah, I moved studios in 2018 maybe, and then within a we had our loft done. So then I
Yeah.
took off like 3 months to paint the loft and make furniture, and then all the stuff we'd moved out of the loft. This is really boring, but this is what happened, so I'm going to say it. We moved all the stuff out of the loft into the rest of the house, and it turned out that it was infested with moths and some other kind of weird beetle that eats carpet, or the grubs eat carpet. So when we went to move the stuff out again, we saw that all our clothes were infested with
Oh no.
clothes moths and all the carpet. So basically, then I was like, okay, so I'll just take off another. Ended up being nearly a year, and just rip everything else out room by room, and clean it and repaint and put down non-carpet floors. And so I took a year off basically to do up our house, which is a great privilege, and I very much enjoyed it. But so then it was only after that, coming back into the studio, that it kind of all kicked off properly. And then now that we've decided that's it, we're staying in this house, it just feels like time to get on with it. So yeah, I've been pushing quite hard with the work, doing a lot. I'm in every day during the school day. Kids are a bit older now, so they're both at secondary, so I can actually stay a little bit later and do almost a full day's work, which is great. And I've also started this doing the Terps sort of mentorship program. They have the off-site thing, which is brilliant. I'm getting a lot out of it, actually. We've got so I don't know if people know about Terps Art School.
No, if you want to explain it, that'd be perfect. I didn't actually know about this.
No, okay. So it's Marcus Harvey set it up, and he was the guy who did the Myra Hindley painting with the handprints that was in the Sensations exhibition. He's a great artist, and I strangely knew him slightly because both our kids went to the same primary school.
Oh wow!
He lives locally as well, so I've kind of occasionally said hello to him, and on a couple of occasions ended up in a pub talking about whatever. But anyway, and then so I knew he'd started this art school, and I'd kind of ummed and ahed about it a bit, and then thought, with the kind of push that I'm trying to do at the moment, I thought I'll give it a go. And they've got a building up in Elephant and Castle where they have I think 20 artists in their studios on site. And then after a few years of doing that, I think when they started, like 2016, something like that maybe. But over the last few years, they've started doing an off-site version as well. So basically, if you live locally, we live in London basically, and have a studio, then you can apply, and they will assign you a mentor who comes to visit you in your studio. And then there's a sort of series of talks that they do, and you get kind of put together with a group of other painters, of your peers, and you meet up with each other and do group crits and visit each other's studios. And it's been really, really interesting and really good. And in terms of building a bit more of a network of people to talk about painting with, and that's been fantastic. So the original question but I can't remember.
Doesn't matter, it's fun.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it is either half the
Oh
time.
yeah, I've done it. Doing a lot of work. So that's that's also introduced a number of other like mini deadlines. So I think at the time, so I applied for Terps probably in March or something this year. It's not so last year by the time this comes out.
Yeah.
And at the same time maybe applied for 3 or 4 other things as well. And completely, my understanding of applying for things is that you apply for 10 with the idea that you'll get 1. That's what we used to do with the public funding side of things. And I think I applied for like 5 or 6 and got like 4. And it's like, oh god, this is going to be a bit busy. So I started Terps in September. I had a show over the summer in Brixton at a nice little gallery called Brixton Art Club, which is like a new thing. And then was in had a feature in a magazine, and had like a nice interview with a Spanish website, which I think you looked up, the arts and culture one.
I did indeed.
Yeah, just kind of all kind of happened. And then once you get a bit of momentum, you kind of don't want to, you you don't want to like let it slow down really. So it feels like you just have to keep pushing. Oh yes, and then the Oh God series was like that's an artist called Dallas Seitz, who used to live in London, and I knew him because I'd done a residency in Norway with him in Stavanger, which he set up with another artist, Kenneth Varp, who was Norwegian. So yeah, I spent a couple of weeks out in Stavanger doing a residency and got to know him a bit out there. Mutual friend stuff. Anyway, he's moved back to Calgary in Canada now and set up his own kind of independent, like a curatorial project called Kyle Marks Projects. And then he was keen to do something with me and invited me to do like a sort of online thing where they'd pump out a painting each day for a week. So I made those. It happened to run over Pentecost. So I decided to look at history paintings of Pentecosts, like Titian's and Van Dyck and such, and then kind of do very loose sort of transcriptions of those, playing around with kind of my slightly cartoony imagery and stuff. So I did that this year. That was good. Yeah, it was good. Lots of things kind of just popped up. That was a lockdown project as well, which kind of ties into something you were gonna.
Yeah, but I say that's what I forgot to ask you at the start. It's on the top of the list. But like, how was the kind of COVID-19 lockdown period for you? I mean, at the point, we're recording this in December 2021, I almost said 2020, in December 2021, and we might potentially go back into a lockdown, potentially. So how did the kind of that whole period of, the initial lockdowns affect you and kind of affect your workflow?
Yeah, well, I had two distinct phases, I think. So there was the initial phase, which was, as with most people, probably like mild panic, and actually I didn't make anything for 3 months at all. I didn't even go in the studio. I just came home, and we were lucky enough to have a bit of a garden. So I just dug up the lawn and turned it into an allotment, which seemed like the only rational thing to do at the time. And then kind of 3 months in, and we realised it was, the kids were still going to be off school. I don't know, it was kind of, then it started to get a bit of a grind, dealing with homeschool and digging. There's only so much of that you can do. But then by the second lockdown, my kids both, one of them was in year 5, 6, primary school, and the other one was already at secondary school. They've both become quite independent and very good at, in some ways I think it was quite good for them. They're quite, they kind of log onto their computer, get their tasks for the day, have like a live meeting at such and such a time, and they had planned their own day, and they were both really quite good at it. So I think for certain kids, I think the whole thing was quite good and probably helped them a lot with some life skills. But by that stage, I was like, okay, well, I can still go to the studio then during the school day, and I got quite into it, and I started off doing a lot of drawing. So I had a lockdown sketchbook, which is like a big fat thing of like 100 pages or something, and I just made 2 or 3 drawings a day, which I've yet to do anything with. I've got them all stacked up here. I keep needing to scan them and put them on my shop or something. I don't know what do people do with stuff. But so that was my lockdown experience. Sort of down then up, and then those drawings kind of led into the more recent paintings. So it was bad and then good.
But it's good that there was a more positive experience at the end and or on a whole, because I think for most people I've spoken to and asked that question, it's been more of a positive thing in terms of people have more time to actually sit down and create work, and people have more time to be able to kind of think about life and think about what they want to do and think about just think, I guess, generally.
So they don't have kids then?
Oh no, with and without kids. No, without kids. Actually, quite a lot of the artists I speak to, I'd say actually probably a good 70% have kids.
Right. Well, I think it was my observations of other people was generally that it went one of 2 ways. It's either you found out that you did genuinely really love your partner and family if you had them, and it was quite positive, or people separated. And it kind of I know a couple of my son's friends, parents separated and they live, in between lockdowns, went and got separate flats and stuff. And, yeah, so it was obviously whatever was wrong was just kind of amplified. But yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones in that respect, I guess.
Absolutely. That's what I didn't think about, which is quite funny. It's funny, but it's also not funny because that's people's lives. And
it's yeah. But yeah, maybe it was going to happen anyway. It just kind of hurried things along a bit.
I mean, then again, I guess it's very much like a test, though, isn't it? Really, it's a test of patience and kind of test of like, you think, oh, like everyone always says, particularly when you work, everyone's always like, oh, I wish I didn't work so much. It's like, but when you actually have the option not to work or you can't work, you kind of realize how important working actually is for just society in general, just for your own well-being. It's pretty crazy in that respect.
Yeah, well, getting out the house is good.
Yeah, I'm about to say exactly. That's exactly the same. Like getting out of the house is really important. I don't think anybody realized that until we couldn't leave the house.
Yeah, true. So, but yeah, that was the Last Supper I've been thinking about doing for a few years, and it was just partly because I built this partition wall which looked perfect for it. Just it was the right dimensions for a Last Supper, and I was just kind of that was always ticking away, and then suddenly this, and just the fact that but even before lockdown, the whole kind of news narrative. So yeah, the Last Supper is this kind of quintessential image of a moment of transition, and then I think the news narrative pre-COVID anyway was that everything's in this sort of state of transition, everything's right on the edge of collapse or change, like global political systems are all kind of right, teetering on the brink. The economy, capitalism, we're in late stage capitalism. The environment is finely balanced. I don't know. Yeah, everything's just falling apart basically, like nothing else, like never before. And then COVID happened, and then it's just like, I don't know. So it just seemed like a very relevant image to be working on. So that's something that came out of lockdown. I think was the kind of the solidification of the decision to work around the Last Supper, which is I did that black and white version that I sent you.
Yeah.
And then I've been working on a sort of more colourful, more drippy kind of version, following the Oh God paintings. And I learned quite a lot about technique from doing those, development technique a bit more. Which is then that's working towards this show that I've got coming up in Lowestoft, which will run over Easter, so it's kind of perfect time.
Oh wow!
So that's going to be themed around one large painting and then maybe a couple of smaller studies. It's quite a small space, but it's a great little gallery. Maybe I should talk a bit about that.
That would be a very good segue into that. That'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Before we forget, because I don't think I added onto the interview notes, so I probably should talk about that.
Don't worry. So actually, it ties a lot of things together, this, because the guy that set it up is called Alexander Costello, who's an old friend of mine, who actually sang at my wedding.
Wow.
But we've also been in bands together. We made music together under the moniker of The Leonard Cohen, which is a sort of a noisy guitar indie band that we had for a while. But he's an artist in his own right, and has done some really cool projects, including something for the Royal British Sculptures, where he was he was the figurehead for a barge, hanging off the front of this barge that drove right across London on the canal, and he's just pointing forward for the whole thing in this white suit, like leaning out the front of the barge. Amazing performance. But so then he moved to Lowestoft and has set up home there with his family in a flat that's above what used to be a tea rooms, like a tea coffee, whatever, like coffee house, or caff. That's the word, isn't it? Caff. And so they've divided the caff up. So he's got a studio at the back, and then the front portion of it is now a gallery, and it's the only kind of contemporary. I don't know. There's a couple of other spaces there, but this is the one he's running it as a not-for-profit, and it's got like CIC, community interest. I can't think what the third C, the other C's for, but yeah, it's a great little space, and I think he's trying to do something really exciting and really good, kind of bringing stuff to a bit of Suffolk that is, very kind of under what's the word? It's a very deprived area, and he's kind of very generously putting a lot of time into this thing, and offering stuff up free, so it's great. So yeah, and then he's offered me a solo show, having kind of did a big group show in September, which I was part of, and then he's had 2 or 3 shows since, and he's doing a video show over the winter, and then I'm going up in March to do my solo show there. So yeah, I was just plugging that basically.
No, that's perfect, and that's kind of. And how are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, it's my first sort of proper solo show, I guess. So I kind of want to make it. I want to make it as best I can, and it's just like everything's kind of aligned. Like it runs over Easter. I'm doing these Last Supper things. Yeah, I've got some ideas. I don't really want to give too much away at the moment about what exactly it's going to look like, but yeah, it just feels like a great thing to do in a really great place, and working with Alex, so he's great. Yeah.
And actually, that actually can segue very nicely into the idea of just exhibiting in general, because obviously you said that you're part of the Brixton Art Club, and actually, I wasn't even aware of this until I read your biography, which is very interesting. And could you talk a bit about because you said that's also a new venture as well? What is it about new ventures that interest you in terms of saying exhibiting at possibly more established places?
Interesting. Well, I mean, I was going to show at the Tape, but I decided I'd rather show at Brixton Art Club. No, it's nice actually, because I think a lot of the things I've done previously have been catching the tail end of stuff.
Yeah.
So at the moment, it really feels like getting involved with stuff that is kind of just starting out, and then there is that kind of buzz and excitement. I mean, it hasn't been intentional, particularly. It's just that's what's happened. But yeah. But yeah, Brixton Art Club's great, and it's, I guess, similarly, it isn't a kind of traditional standard kind of white cube commercial gallery space. It's kind of run by a local guy who's like a DJ. And it kind of sits in between being a gallery, a kind of bar, cafe, nightclub, and it's just like a really cool little venue that kind of sits as part of a community. I don't know, I like that. It suits me, it suits my work. I kind of like that kind of realness. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit cheesy, but yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. So yeah, so I wanted to ask, what would be kind of the optimal environment for people to see your work in?
Yeah, I don't know. I like the idea that I'm engaging with a history of art. So there is kind of I think showing in a gallery environment is kind of cool, because it's sort of that's the place where those conversations happen. But then I'm kind of just as interested really in the sort of democratizing who sees the work a bit more, because anyway, as open as spaces are, there's still a number of barriers to going to commercial galleries to see kind of new work, and even going to kind of museum institutions, etc., and class things, whatever. So I kind of the Brixton Art Club's really good for that, because it is it's just a place where anyone can go in and have a cup of coffee or a beer and just kind of hang out and see the work. And then when I did that live draw thing, that was brilliant. It was like people banging on the window and and at the end, like a bunch of people came over and were like, "You finished? Oh, can we come in?" And they came in and had a beer with me, and we had a chat, and they were like, "Yeah, we were going to have a drink and then go somewhere else, but they were sat in the bar opposite, and they decided to stay and watch the whole thing. So they sat there for 3 hours.
Wow.
And then came over afterwards to come and have a chat about it, and say thanks, and we're really excited about it. I don't know, So that sort of thing, I think, is really nice. It's not like they've kind of gone, but something came up on their email because they're on the mailing list for a gallery, and then they went along, kind of stroked their chins, and it was just real people having a drink who were like, yeah, this is cool. I don't know, and that I like that, and it kind of fits with me. I don't like being in bands and whatever. It's just like I like that stuff happening, people getting it.
So do you have a kind of viewer in mind for your work when you create?
Yeah, not really. I'm probably making it with me in mind. I'm my own ideal viewer, but then I also think there's maybe a thing about, now that I've got kids, like sometimes I've written stuff like this. I wrote a bunch of poems about kind of quite big things like time and the nature of the universe and whatever. Slightly kind of, so in my mind as I was writing them, they were poems. I was writing them as though I was explaining them to like a 13, 14-year-old version of myself, or maybe to my son who's now 14. And I thought, if you can put a complex idea into that kind of language, and without kind of killing it and making it just kind of boring, still make it kind of, if it's comprehensible for that person. So I don't know. Yeah, maybe there's another. I don't know if I do that with my paintings so much, but it's not something that I think about a lot, I have to say. I'm just making stuff to see what happens and responding to it myself. But yeah, I kind of like this idea of it being, I love it. If my kids see my work and I get a good reaction off them, that's almost the best reaction. But they are almost my ideal viewer. And when I have open studios, people bring their kids in, and then the ones that kind of go, oh look, there's a Willy, and start laughing or something. Then I just think, yes, like that's brilliant. Like, what were the other people doing? Why couldn't they have that kind of like wondrous, sort of joyful response? Why is that all being kind of beaten out of them or something? I don't know.
Actually, but then maybe that's what you're seeking in your own work then, the kind of sense of wonder, the sense of kind of like childlike fascination with just shapes, colors, textures.
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah. And I like, so I'm really into the American animator who's now retired from animation and become a painter, called Ralph Bakshi. I wrote a piece about him for like the Felix H. Wilkinson website. And actually that was a big kind of pivotal moment in my work as well, seeing this film Cool World that he did, which is kind of a terrible film, but just kind of so raucous and ridiculous that it kind of just really made me think, oh, my work's too polite. I need to turn the volume up a bit, make it more fun and in the face. Yeah. I mean, he did Ralph Bakshi when he was, I think, he may have been in his 80s by then, but he did a crowdfunder for like a 20-minute animation that he did called The Last Days of Coney Island. And it's the most kind of grotesque, messy, like slightly badly drawn, nonsensical animation about this kind of, it's like some kind of little thing, boy clown thing wearing a nappy, and there's like gangsters, and they just gangsters eating like human remains off a table, and it's just all these like weird images. The story's really hard to follow, but it's just so amazing, so like visceral and weird, and I don't know, I just love it. So I'm kind of trying to get closer to that, really, something more. I think I described something there.
Okay. So the question I ask a lot of the artists I interview is, what does it mean to be a successful artist, and how do you measure the success of your own work?
I don't know. I mean, if I'm happy with it, really, I don't know. If I'm discontented, then I don't feel like I'm successful. And if I'm kind of like, this is good, it's going somewhere, or like, the hard work feels worth it or something, I don't know. If it's kind of asking me some questions, or it's setting me off, then it's good. So I don't. Yeah, that's how I measure my own success, I think.
Okay, that's cool. That's a very good answer. That's a very interesting answer. No, that's a very interesting
Right.
answer because a lot of people are like, oh, how much I sell or how many followers I have or,
Right.
kind of very arbitrary measures of art of kind of success and
Right.
what it means success. And it's nice that personal satisfaction is what makes you successful because you can have all the numbers you want, but doesn't mean you're happy with what you're doing. And I think
Yeah.
that's really nice to hear that clearly everything you're putting out, you're satisfied with to a
Well,
point.
I don't know. People would probably question the authenticity of that, but I really feel that. I mean, obviously, like George Condo is immensely successful, like
Yeah.
financially. But it was so is Anthony Gormley. I think his output is like a terrible failure, whereas Condo is a success. Like on both terms. Gormley is just talk about narcissism. He's just endlessly reproducing himself and stick it, and it's just doesn't go anywhere. I really dislike him. I think his attitude and his work is terrible. You can cut this bit out if you want, but
no,
but do you know what I mean? That's
actually not your entitled opinion.
I do whatever there is. Yeah. So if you define it as financial success, then whatever. But yeah.
Okay, so the next question I have from you is from the last artist I interviewed.
Oh yeah.
This is completely out of order from the order that I originally had because the few interviews got scrapped. Rest in peace for them.
Okay.
They're just going to stay in the archives of my hard drive forever. So, question from the last artist I interviewed, which was the really lovely lady Diane V. Radel, and her question for you is: what did you do or learn that has helped you the most so far in your career?
Oh yeah, I think I made a note for this one. I was going to hark back to. Well, I didn't know I was. Unless this is another callback to the thing about determinism and quantum physics. So maybe I did know that I was going to say this. But anyway, it was a bit talking about the work, whether you're kind of making a piece of work with an intention to have an end product. But yeah, so the most important thing I think I've learned is to let the work lead me rather than vice versa.
That's cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely what's happened. Like gone from being kind of very conceptual and taught and kind of you end up making something which is kind of an illustration of an idea, essentially, to then getting into kind of a more of a kind of process technique driven thing, which kind of allows stuff to come out. Yeah, so follow the work, don't try and lead it. Right.
Okay, so do you have a question for the next artist I interview?
So yeah, one of the interesting things we did at Terps was Phil Allen, who's a great painter and also like program leader, does an exercise with everybody in groups when you during the first term, which he calls 11 questions, and the whole range of questions in there from, what's changed in your work over the years to what stayed the same, blah blah blah. What's the most important image to you that you've in your entire life, that kind of thing. And I thought I would pick what I found to be the hardest question to answer, which was, what's an example of bad art? So I really struggled with this because the preceding question was, what is good art? And so I can pick anything almost. But
that's a very good question.
You can find a lot of good examples. But then what is bad art? And then I found myself like looking at all kinds of stuff. And then it's really, I think it's much more useful to kind of find merit in stuff. But I think as soon as you start looking at something properly, you can kind of, like a kind of bad teenage drawing of a unicorn or something. Then actually, no, that's kind of somebody really meant this. And there's like a real authenticity thing going on. What about, I don't know, some like, I don't know, like ironic, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, there's all sorts of ways. Anyway, that would be my question.
That's a very good question.
Give an example of bad art. And I eventually went for Anthony Gormley. So that's another callback. It's all coming together perfectly.
It actually is. So, how would you like to develop your practice in 2022? And do you have any goals you'd like to achieve?
Well, yeah, I definitely want to make this show in Lowestoft like the best it can be. So that's, I don't know if that's developing my practice, but it's definitely a goal. Yeah. And then in terms of developing, like it's weird. I started this course. I've kind of started it, like hit the ground running. So I feel like I'm already doing a lot of stuff. And actually most of this first term has been kind of, like finishing off a new set of heads, working towards this Last Supper painting, doing a commission for Brixton Art Club, doing a portrait thing that he wants out the back. And I had a show and doing the art car boot fair, and it was like there hasn't been much space or time to do what you would imagine doing this kind of course would be, which is like, okay, now I'm going to take 6 months off and I'm going to like focus on thinking about and developing the work. Whereas, I've had to just kind of carry on as though I'm not really doing the course, and it's just been an extra thing on my to-do list every week. So what I think I'd like to do after the show in Lowestoft is kind of, take a bit of a breather and really kind of focus on, going, maybe kind of disappearing up my arsehole a little bit more, and trying to kind of, focus on developing the work and seeing where it goes. And I don't know where that will be, to be honest. But
So what would your younger self think about your work?
that's an interesting one. Again, like calling back to what I was talking about, I would be intrigued because I've tried to have those conversations with other bits. I've pulled out old bits of work and made partner pieces for them and had that kind of weird conversation with myself. And I've already talked about Crap's last tape. I don't know. I think that I was probably, going back to the what is bad art question. I think my younger self would have found what is good art to be the harder question, and that I would have found loads of things to be bad. And I can remember being at Chelsea and kind of wandering around, just like me and a couple of mates going, that's shit. And like, it just felt really good to be able to dismiss stuff, whereas I think as I've got older, I've been much more interested in kind of taking time and finding what could be of value in things. So I wonder if my younger self might have been, might be a little bit, a bit more critical perhaps of what I'm doing. I don't know. But I think that's a really good question, actually. And it's one that I would like to sort of take away and think about some more for myself. Yeah,
absolutely. That's cool. I can't remember why did I ever think about that? I don't know why I thought about that question. It popped into my head. Because the thing is, I listen to a lot of art podcasts, and I listen to, obviously I talk with a lot of people, and if people have questions or if I hear something, I'm like, oh, okay, cool, I'll write that down. So I have endless lists of different questions to ask people. And when it comes to writing notes, it's a case of me just kind of putting stuff together. And that's just happened to be a question that I actually only asked maybe a couple of times, maybe only a handful of times at this point in time. But it's one of those questions that I really like because it makes you stop and really think about stuff.
Oh, it does.
I don't know. Definitely. I like asking questions that make people think rather than just be like, oh, who's your influences? And, because I think that's cool, but everybody asks that all the time, constantly.
No. And I just want, because also which younger self, like me as a kid, me as a teenager, with me like when I was like 23 or something, and I completely dismissed painting as a kind of folly or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
So the next question is quite similar. It's not quite the same. It's quite similar, and it's not my question. It's from the podcast Artsy AF with Andrew Norris, who is a great painter in his own right. And the question is, how has art changed you over time?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if I hadn't been doing it, I just think I don't know what I would have done. I mean, if you kind of include music, if I hadn't been an artist, I probably would have been a musician. I definitely would have chosen something where it's really hard to make any kind of living from it. That's for sure. But if I hadn't been doing art, then I would be a mess. I think. I don't know. It definitely is something that keeps me together. So I don't know. That's not a very good answer.
No, that's fine. Hey, it's an answer, and I appreciate that. It's an honest answer,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that above anything else. Why would you? I've just random curiosity. Why would you have picked something else that doesn't make you a lot of money?
Everything that I've ever kind of been interested in is not particularly profitable. So even like when I had to earn money, I'm very privileged now to be in a position where I don't have to make any money because my wife is the breadwinner, and I've set up a situation where I have a small income from whatever. But I was, it'd be like I did a bit of teaching, which is not particularly highly paid, and I'd always do it part time. What else? And then in times when I wasn't doing that, I've done a little bit of woodwork and stuff for people, or like, I don't know. It's like I don't really prioritize making money. I just don't think it's. I don't even believe it's real. I don't think it means anything. It's just like, I don't know. If I could, my dream is almost to be like a. I think, I used to, when I was a kid, I really, really wanted to be a Labrador or something, where you just like, you just get looked after, you get given your meals, and then you can do your stuff and run around. And so for me, instead of like sniffing lampposts, it's making art. But as long as I've got enough to eat, and I can have a meager social life here and there, and I can got time to make my work, then that's all I need.
So I imagine you prioritize your happiness over financial gain.
Okay, that's probably a better way of putting it. Yeah.
It's an interesting outlook, because I think
a
lot of contemporary art, or a lot of art in the last, say, 10 years, has been very commercialized. There's always been this push to create work that sells, or there's like the idea of commerce and art never really see eye to eye. And I think that's kind of interesting to hear your perspective, where it's like, yeah, okay, cool. You enjoy what you do.
It's not a value judgment on art, and I don't have a problem with people making money if they're into money. I mean, my wife's an economist, and there's all kinds of models there about what motivates different people and stuff.
Of course.
So, and my political leanings are pretty kind of left. Probably because I'm not that into money. Whereas, if I was, and I kind of felt like I had a right to, I have no problem with other people being like, oh, I want a certain quality of life and whatever. I always imagine I'd be living in like a, bedsit / whatever, live work space, and just be kind of making work, sleeping, partying a bit, and just living that kind of life. Ended up with a herb garden. It's just weird, but I don't need it. I don't really want it. I just want to, it's not one of my priorities.
I like that attitude. I think that's really respectable. I think that's very respectable. Right. So 2 more questions, and then we shall call it a day.
Okay.
So the penultimate question, fancy word. Yeah. Penultimate question is.
I like the word penultimate.
In your opinion, what makes a good piece of art?
Oof. What makes a good piece of art? Well, I guess the stuff that I like generally is, I think, sincere. So I think sincerity is probably an important thing. Sincerity. I can't think. I don't know. I'll just leave it at that. Probably just leave that one out.
No, it was a Dora borrowed question, which I forgot to mention.
Okay.
So the other end of that question was, what was the last image or piece of media that you saw that captivated you, and why did it leave such an impression?
I'm trying to think of something that maybe something new, because I saw the George Condo's latest show at Hauser and Wirth. He had both galleries in London, and that was kind of like, I don't know. Yeah, he's always been a bit of a hero, but I haven't seen very much. I mean, hardly any of his stuff in the flesh until then, only in reproduction. And kind of when you see them small, it's the same way they do. Newspaper cartoons are drawn like twice the size, aren't they? And then reduced down so they look much more precise than they are when they're actually drawn. So I was kind of amazed at how loose his work is in the flesh and how kind of like sloppy, really. It's. I mean, I've watched video. You see the videos of him in interviews making those drawings and stuff. They're done quite quickly, and there's an immediacy and stuff. I don't know, but so that really got me. Like it kind of made me feel like I need to loosen up a bit. Sometimes I'm a bit tight, but I'm always like fighting that sort of graphic sensibility. So that was one that definitely had a big impact recently. And then I saw a really beautiful show. It's completely unrelated and not anything like I do, but there was an exhibition by an artist who's now dead called Noah Davis. And it's just, it was just really beautiful to see some amazingly made paintings, just really beautiful, technically brilliant paintings. And then at the top, it was at David Zwerner, and then at the top, they've kind of reproduced this, what's it called, the Museum of Everything or something. I think they call it Museum of Everything. But she set up in like a garage in like downtown New York. And it was a sort of perfect replica of this kind of People's Museum itself. So he was a really interesting artist on a number of levels, but that kind of affected me. And I'm not quite sure what the ramifications of encountering his work are yet, but it feels like something's happened, and we'll see what that does.
That's really interesting that you're aware that there is a shift somewhere. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Right, so the very last question, which is also another two-part question, is what are you currently working on, and where can people find more about you and your work? Okay.
Well, so as I've mentioned, it's this. I'm kind of working on this set of work themed around the Last Supper. A number of studies and stuff, and that's working towards this solo show. So that's my main focus after the Christmas break, to get back in the studio and nail some of that stuff down, ready for the show. What was the second part of the question again?
Where can people find out?
Yeah. So I guess a number of sites. So I've got my Instagram page, which is at Duncan McAfee, which is my name. I'm also on Facebook, but that's basically just auto posting from Instagram. Nobody uses Facebook anymore. I don't do Twitter because I just find it unfathomable and uninteresting. I have a website, which is my name, duncanmcafee.com. And then if you're really kind of interested at delving deeper, at the bottom of the bit with my CV on, there's a link to my old website, which still exists, duncanmcafee.co.uk. No, that's the shop, sorry. duncanmcafee.org is my kind of archive website, so you can see the kind of nonsense. I did actually try and clean it up a bit and sort of slightly categorize it. So I had painting at the top and then sculpture, sound, so it was much more much more confusing. It was much more confusing before. You can use the Internet Archive. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah. Is it Brewster Kahle? Is it?
Yes.
Is that right? Brewster Kahle?
I think so.
Yeah. The Wayback Machine.
Yes.
Yeah. So you could probably, if you had genuine interest, you could use the Wayback Machine to go and visit my website in 2020, and then you'd see it in its full confusing glory. But no, I love that project's great. This whole thing about he used to have like a van driving around like villages in depths of Africa, like printing out books. There was like a library, but it was basically like a hard drive and a printer, and people for $1 could like just get a book, any book in the whole of the Library of Congress, and just get it printed out for $1. Amazing.
That's crazy.
He's a really interesting guy. Yeah. So that went off on a tangent, but
That's perfect.
Yeah. So I've got the website. Yeah, and then look, Brixton Art Club, look them up because that's a great little venue, and they've got a little website with some of my stuff and various other people's stuff on. And they look up 303 Projects in Lowestoft as well, which is a fantastic gallery, and that's where I'm going to have my show in March through April. So, yeah.
That is absolutely perfect. Duncan, thank you so much for your time. Honestly, thank you so much.
Cheers, Aaron. Well, it's been great. Thanks for inviting me on.
That concludes my conversation with Duncan McAfee. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about it, please send me an email at theflyingfruitbowl@gmail.com or by social media sites such as Instagram and Twitter. The Flying Fruit Bowl podcast can now be found on a variety of sites such as Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Music. Please consider rating, reviewing, sharing, or subscribing on any of these sites to help garner more attention for the show and to spread the word. Please check out theflyingfruitbowl.co.uk for daily art inspiration and written interviews. Also, we now have a Patreon page if you'd like to support the platform further. Tiers start from £1, and more information can be found over at patreon.com/theflyingfruitbowl. Additionally, if you'd prefer to make a one-time donation, we now also have a PayPal. The link to our PayPal should be included in the show notes. Once again, thank you very much for listening to this episode today. And until next time, folks, please stay safe.